Let's turn our attention to, well, more a conversation about reclaiming the England flag, not just the British flag, the England flag, the flag for St George's Day, of course, as it is today. The Prime Minister has issued a statement, obviously in no way related to next week's elections, local elections, but he launched a savage attack on those who, says, sow division, targeting those who whipped up hatred in the aftermath of the Southport killings carrying the England flag. He said that he remembers 1996 and the best of our country. We came together during the Euro football tournament at the old Wembley Stadium. Isn't it weird? He says that's the best of our country. It was a great time, but I mostly remember it for the beer. But he said, yet now we can see people trying to sow division in our communities, people taking the red and white of our flag with them as they throw bricks at businesses. This is what happened last year in the Southport riots. We must fight it because it was the aftermath of the riots that showed what it means to be English. It marked the coming together of a country. People who got together the morning after, all across Britain, with shovels, brooms and brushes to clean up their communities. He said that this is in that spirit that we reclaim our flag for our country, for English decency, honour and fairness, wrench it out of the hands of those who want to divide this nation and reclaim it for good. But does it need reclaiming? Well, let's talk to Elliot Wilson. He's an historian and writer and a former clerk at the House of Commons. A very, very good morning to you, Elliot.
Good morning, Julia.
Do we need to reclaim our flag?
I think it's the wrong way to look at it, because what the Prime Minister's effectively done is ceded a lot of ground already to extremists, because he's saying, oh, they've somehow claimed the identity of England, of St George, of the flag, and we need to get it back. But there's this curious and extremely irritating sense about what the Prime Minister's doing. It's like somebody who's just discovered a television series that you've been watching for years and is now lecturing you on how brilliant it is.
Yes.
And you think, I know, I was there. And I think it's a very odd way of putting it. And it's fairly nakedly political, and I think it's not even got a veneer of plausibility about it.
Well, if this is the thing, and the reaction we've had on the phone lines and online, people are really, really angry. Susan earlier saying, look, he's the problem. He's the one who's divided our country, particularly with two-tiered justice and the like. And Georgina saying, actually Keir Starmer is bigoted. He's a hater of all things British. This is a Labour leader of a Labour movement with their party, which is very much not patriotic. They want us to be, they don't recognise democratic votes for things like Brexit. They want us to be ruled by bureaucrats in Brussels. They seem to think, Emily Thornberry, Labour MP, that tweet way back when of Rochdale, the England flag being flown by white van man. They seem to actually just think we're all ghastly, horrible, racist, transphobic, God knows what else bigots. And they're ashamed of us and indeed how we vote and indeed of our history. Isn't that part of the problem, that he doesn't get how most of us don't share his loathing and fear of our flag?
I think there is a strand in the Labour Party, and certainly quite a strong element in Sir Keir Starmer, I think, which looks at patriotism as something that's a bit vulgar, a bit unthinking, and completely foreign to his way of thinking. It would be fascinating to know why he is so passionate about being English, about England. All he seems to be able to talk about is the NHS, of course, which is the sort of inviolable and eternal symbol of all that's good about Britain, and his plan for change, and maybe 1996. And you think, well, we are a very, very old nation, 1,000 years old, a bit more. If all you've got is the National Health Service, which is in considerable difficulties, a football tournament 30 years ago, and your current set of policies, that's not really much for a national identity.
No, but also, this is a man who constantly says, multiculturalism, diversity is our strength. Whereas actually, our country was very undiverse for many, many centuries until only a few decades ago. And in fact, one would argue actually that has been our strength, that actually having a monoculture, having something that unites people, that brings people together, shared values. There's loads of evidence that high trust monoculture countries do much better than countries that sort of don't really have anything to unite around, that don't really have anything they all share and believe in.
But I think there's also something deeper, isn't there? There's a sense that if we do have a national identity, both as Britons and as Englishmen and women, there's been no invitation to people who come to live here to buy into anything, because clearly immigration is not the death knell of society in itself, but you need something to say, come and live in our country and buy into a certain set of values, principles, ethics, whatever. And this is what it is. But you all need to be part of the same community. And I think that's the really difficult thing that that a lot of people, particularly on the progressive left, have struggled with. They can't bear the idea of saying to people, this is what we believe in, and we need you to respect.
And if you don't know, not just respect it, to sign up to it. If you don't, then you're not welcome. But that's the interesting thing is, it's that not only they don't expect people to do that, they've actually, when you say multiculturalism is a good thing, multi-ethnicity, that's fine, I've got no issue with that. But multiculturalism, we're all saying that the culture of this country is not superior, it's not the best. Well, why would you want to live in a country that you didn't think have the best culture in the world? I mean, for instance, I want to live in a liberal democracy with equality but I also want to live in a country that has a really good sense of humour and good music. I think we are unique in that. I really do. I think we have a unique place in the world in that. And I don't understand people who aren't proud of the uniqueness of our nation and don't want to protect that.
Well, absolutely. The strange thing about the British, and actually I think it's particularly about the English, is that whereas a lot of countries will say, this is what we're about, this is what we celebrate. Yes, there are complications and it's more difficult than that in history, but we'll deal with that. But this is the headline. Whereas in England and Britain, we seem to say, it's all a bit complicated, so we can't talk about it. We'll just leave it be. And I think that's completely the wrong way to look at it.
But when you say we, the trouble is, it's not we, the people, isn't it? It's the media classes, it's the political classes, it's the establishment. They find it all a bit embarrassing. They still think that, Britain is the worst thing that happened to the world because we're white and there was slavery and the Industrial Revolution and carbon and they just the whole thing is all just terribly embarrassing and awful, and they really wish no one would notice. They're not proud of our nation and our history and our culture and our language and the gifts we've given to the world, whereas I think most British people are.
I think you're absolutely right. I think there is, in some politicians, there's a kind of national cringe that they can't bear to think that we are in any way saying that not only that we're the best in the world, but that we're good at all. And I think if you talk to, the average voter, they will be patriotic. They won't think about it very much because they don't need to. Yeah. It's not something you need to analyse and dwell on. It's an instinctive part of you, but it's part of what makes you part of your culture and your society. But it's when you get people who suddenly realise that it's the 23rd of April and think, oh God, I'd better be patriotic. Quick, what can I say about the NHS? That I think people look at this with great scepticism and think that it's actually worse than saying nothing because it's fake.
Yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't feel authentic at all. Do you think that genuinely Sir Keir Starmer sort of looks at the England flag, I would say even the British flag, the Union flag, and feels a sense of pride?
To be honest, when I look at the Prime Minister, I have enormous difficulty in working out what he's thinking. I don't understand.
I think he thinks that too. I think he has enormous difficulty working out what he's thinking.
Very possibly. It does seem to swing wildly from day to day. I don't know. I don't think he has an instinctive wish to say, I am English, I'm proud of being English, and these are some marvellous things about England. I mean, I've never heard him talk about, Magna Carta or Shakespeare or William Wilberforce or, any of these kind of, or the foundation of Parliament, which, for all its faults, we've had Parliament for 800 years, and it's done a reasonably good job, and we've been a representative democracy of one kind or another.
Well, as Churchill said, it's the worst form of governance apart from all the others.
Absolutely. And I don't hear Sir Keir Starmer talking about Churchill very much either, but then he's probably afraid of the fringe contributions you get about that as well.
Yeah, indeed. You were a clerk in the House of Commons dealing with MPs of yours. Do you think things has got worse? I mean, there have been times when we've been very patriotic, but then people will say, jingoistic over things like the Falklands. Why shouldn't we have been jingoistic over the Falklands and protecting British people and an island state being invaded by a foreign force? I mean, yeah, that would be a point when we would do that. But do you think the average MP really gets and is in touch with how the average Brit feels about this?
I think there is an increasing sense of dislocation because a lot of MPs now increasingly are coming from a slightly insulated, university educated, working in politics, going straight into Parliament class. That I do think there is a sense of isolation and disconnect. But I think there's also a sense of institutions being bad, history being bad, anything old being bad, and novelty being praised as the great god. And I think that's very, very difficult for any nation which wants to have any self-respect.
Fascinating to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us, historian and writer Elliot Wilson. Claire Pissell, talking a lot about Labour. You know, this is it's clearly inauthentic and a play for votes, for reform threatening them in those red wall seats. We know a lot of Labour MPs are rather worried, you know, with those council votes next week. But is there a problem also in the Tories with this? Not as bad.
No, I was going to say not as bad. I think there probably is a little bit of hesitation amongst some members of the party that they don't want to offend anybody. But doing that, I think you offend everybody.
But that's like, we had a call a little bit earlier talking about her school, kids' primary school, and celebrating George Day and things. And there'll be lots of schools or local councils that say, oh, well, we don't mark these events because we don't want to offend anybody, we don't want to be inclusive. And yet they'll do, like, you know, Happy Eid Day or whatever.
Or Refugee Week.
Yeah, I mean, and you just sort of think, but who is it offending? And anyway, if you live in the country, if I lived in if I lived in France, I wouldn't be offended by Bastille Day. That would be weird. Don't live in France if that offends you.
But surely you need to learn about these things. You need to learn about your own country, your own culture, and it isn't about offending people. It's just about actually learning.
Which is why bonfire night is more important than
we love
Halloween.
a bit of bonfire night.
No, I mean, I love both, but it's more important because it's actually about our history.
I was going to say there's a historic connection, whereas Halloween is not a historic connection. It's much more spiritual. But you've got to.
Halloween's just an import from America because of Hollywood movies. We all thought, let's get.
I was trying to be nice.
Let's get dressed up and have some free chocolate. I mean, what's not to like? 11 for, as I say, if it's a festival that involves chocolate or fireworks, I'm in.